Stop. This is the empire of death. Those words, chiselled in 1786 above a narrow passage deep beneath Paris, do not welcome. They warn. Beneath one of the world's most radiant cities lies something older than monuments, deeper than memory. A second Paris, made not of stone, but of bone. Nearly 80 years after that inscription, Victor Hugo would write in Les Misérables, "Beneath the foundations of Paris lies another Paris, a Paris of sewers, a Paris of shadows, a Paris of the dead." But long before the ossuary took form, long before the bones were stacked in solemn symmetry, there was only rot, and the unbearable weight of the dead. Few are ever invited, but tonight, it is you. Step inside the Ink and Lantern Society, where shadows guard their secrets, but the dead still have stories to tell. Tonight, you will walk beside me through history's forbidden corridors, each dark truth waiting to be heard. Now that you've crossed our threshold, subscribe to wander deeper into our sacred crypts and confess in the comments below your favourite tale from history's gallows. Breathe slowly. Let the outer world fade. You are among the keepers, and now we descend. In the Middle Ages, Parisian burial was a communal affair. The wealthy had tombs, yes, but for most, death meant the charnel pit, large open mass graves dug in the heart of the city. Among the most infamous was the cemetery of Les Innocents, first used in the 12th century and spanning 4 acres in what is now the bustling Les Halles district. Bodies were placed layer upon layer, often soaked in quicklime to hasten decay. When the pit filled, it was sealed, until the next generation of death arrived. And it always arrived. The cemetery operated under a ghoulish efficiency. Records show that a single mass grave could hold 1,500 bodies. When space ran short, older remains were exhumed and stored in 2-story galleries called charniers that surrounded the cemetery, their upper floors housing shops and scribes, their lower levels lined with bones displayed in grotesque symmetry. By the 18th century, Les Innocents had become a grotesque mound of humanity. Over 600 years, an estimated 2 million bodies had been interred in this single cemetery alone. The cemetery walls bulged under pressure. In storms, soil washed away and bones spilled into the gutters. Residents in neighbouring buildings claimed the stench leached through their walls. Some said the air soured their wine. Bakers complained their loaves tasted of rot, milk curdled, meat spoiled, and always the smell lingered, a sweet, cloying rot that settled in the throat like grief. Property values plummeted around burial grounds. The wealthy fled to distant quarters. The poor, trapped by circumstance, breathed death with every meal, every prayer, every fitful sleep. This was an era before germ theory. Disease was believed to travel through miasma, bad air. And no air was worse than the air around the cemetery. Medical treatises of the time described the putrid emanations as capable of inducing fever, madness, and moral corruption. Even the clergy began to whisper that such proximity to decay was an affront to God. In 1763, one health inspector wrote that the ground near Les Innocents was not only unwholesome but insupportable. Funerals had to be rushed, priests gagged under their vestments, and even the devout began demanding that the dead be evicted. The final straw came in 1780, when an unusually wet spring caused a basement wall adjoining the cemetery to collapse. Human remains cascaded into a private residence like a macabre avalanche. The homeowner, driven to madness by the sight and smell, fled Paris forever. One Parisian quipped, "The dead have become our neighbours, and they make poor company." Death was no longer sacred. It had become an infestation, where the bones of millions became the foundations of silence. Beneath the waking city, the old quarries yawned like open mouths. For over 800 years, limestone had been carved from beneath Paris to build its cathedrals, its palaces, its very identity. These quarries stretched for miles in a honeycomb of darkness. 300 kilometers of tunnels threading beneath 11 of Paris's 20 arrondissements. But these tunnels were treacherous. Streets collapsed. Buildings vanished. In 1774, a section near Val-de-Grâce caved in without warning, swallowing entire houses into the dark. The Avenue d'Enfer, the Avenue of Hell, earned its name not from superstition, but from the very real terror of solid ground becoming void. The city panicked. Something had to be done. Enter Charles Axel Guillemot, architect, engineer, and the first inspector of quarries. Born in 1730, this methodical genius had trained under the finest engineers in Europe. His task, to map the underworld and prevent Paris from crumbling into itself. Under his steady eye, tunnels were reinforced with limestone pillars, catalogued with meticulous precision, and rendered strangely suitable for the dead. Guillemot's underground surveys revealed a staggering truth. The quarries could accommodate far more than stone. They could house the deceased masses that plagued the city above. The temperature remained constant at 57 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, perfect for preservation. The humidity was controlled. The limestone naturally filtered the air. And so, in 1786, as the cemetery evacuations began, it was Guillemot who oversaw the first transfers. Night after night, from April to May 1787, he supervised the descent of the dead, their bones dumped unceremoniously into wide pits and sealed behind temporary walls. The work was conducted exclusively at night to avoid public panic. Black-draped carts rolled through empty streets, their cargo hidden beneath tarps, accompanied by priests chanting funeral dirges that echoed off the sleeping city's walls. But it wasn't until 1810 that the catacombs took their haunting shape. Guillemot's successor, Louis-Étienne Héricard de Thury, had a vision, not of storage, but of symmetry. He saw not a dumping ground, but a monument. A former mining engineer turned curator of death, Héricard had studied Roman catacombs and was deeply influenced by romantic ideals of sublime terror and beauty. He ordered the bones arranged. Walls of femurs were laid like bricks. Skulls were positioned in repeating rows, some in straight lines, others in geometric shapes, hearts, crosses, circles. Columns rose from stacked bones like eerie altars. Chambers were named the Crypt of the Passion, the Sepulchral Lamp, the Well of the Lost. The ossuary had become not just a tomb, but an archive, an art piece. One visitor in 1814 wrote, "It is as if the grave itself has become an artist. Death arranges its dead with reverence, and a certain dreadful elegance. And still the bones kept coming. The bodies of plague victims, of revolution casualties, of entire parishes were funneled down into the depths, 6 million souls in all. Bones from the cemetery of Saint-Étienne-des-Grès, the Madeleine Cemetery, and dozens of smaller burial grounds joined the ossuary. Even the remains from the infamous Salpêtrière Hospital, where the mad and destitute met their ends, found their final rest in these hallowed tunnels. The architecture of Paris above stood proudly on the shoulders of the anonymous dead below. But Ericar's transformations did not end with design. He added inscriptions, mottos and meditations etched into plaques and portals. Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Vulnerant omnes, ultima necat. All hours wound, the last one kills. Happy is he who is always mindful of his end. Memento mori. Remember you must die. These were not just messages, they were reminders that beneath the skin of every city, death waits, not maliciously, but patiently. Bones arranged not to terrify, but to testify. The catacombs over time became more than a tomb. They became a gallery spanning nearly 2 miles of displayed remains. In some chambers, skulls are arranged into hearts, human love, now calcified, beating gently in the lamplight. In others, femurs form perfect circles, wheels of eternity with no beginning and no end. The crypt of the Passion hosts a towering column of tibiae, spiralling upward like a chapel spire, rising 8 feet from floor to ceiling. These were not haphazard arrangements. They were language. The mathematical precision reveals the mind of an engineer. Each wall contains exactly the same number of skulls per row. Each circle maintains perfect geometry. Each cross aligns with architectural principles that would make cathedral builders weep. Latin phrases etched in stone offered meditations on life and death. What you are now, we once were. What we are now, you shall be. Pensez à la mort. Think of death. Il faut mourir. One must die. But perhaps the most haunting inscription appears above a doorway lined with children's skulls, smaller and more delicate than their adult counterparts. Resurgam. I shall rise again. In the darker halls, symbols rise from the walls, crosses, arrows, spirals, some religious, some inexplicable. Cataphiles whisper that some of these signs are protective, others are warnings. Modern analysis has identified Masonic symbols, alchemical sigils, and markings that predate even the ossuary's creation, carved by quarry workers centuries before bones arrived. The sepulchral lamp, an urn-shaped feature once lit with eternal flame, burned not for light, but remembrance. Deep beneath the surface, in silence thick as stone, even a flicker of warmth seemed sacred. Records show that lamp oil was delivered monthly until 1860, when gas lines reached the tunnels. Some areas bear the marks of anonymous artists, skulls fitted with candle niches, bones layered into mosaics. In one chamber, a perfect vertebrae arch frames a doorway, beckoning the living to pass beneath the gaze of the dead. Modern forensic analysis of the arrangements suggests the work of at least 3 distinct artisans, each with their own aesthetic philosophy. But perhaps the most unsettling artistry is spatial. In the Hall of Crosses, skulls are positioned at perfect eye level, a corridor of faces. Their sockets seem to follow. Their jaws, half-parted, seem to whisper. The acoustics here are extraordinary. Words spoken in normal conversation carry for hundreds of feet, while shouts are strangely muffled. Sound engineers who studied the ossuary in the 1980s discovered that the bone arrangements create natural reverb chambers and echo patterns that amplify whispers while dampening louder sounds. Visitors describe it as being watched, not maliciously, but knowingly, as if the bones remember. Even in death there is design. For some, death was not the end, it was the invitation. The catacombs may have been sealed from the public, but the curious always find a way in. In 1787, only 1 year after the ossuary began to take shape, the Comte d'Artois, later crowned King Charles VI, descended with members of his court. Robes dragged in the damp, candlelight flickered across rows of skulls. For the royal entourage, it was a novelty, a fashionable horror, because apparently even death needed to be trendy in 18th century France. Early visitors included illustrious names like Napoleon III, who arranged for his son to tour the catacombs, perhaps as an early lesson in mortality, and Franz I of Austria. Because nothing says diplomatic relations quite like bonding over a few million dead Parisians. Writers came next. Victor Hugo and Alexandre Dumas reportedly found inspiration for their works here, with Hugo famously writing in Les Misérables of the Paris beneath Paris. For Dumas, every skull was indeed a lost volume, though these particular books had rather grim endings. The catacombs have featured in works of literature, including Victor Hugo's Les Misérables, proving that even in death Parisians knew how to make an impression on the literary world. But beneath the footsteps of poets and kings came whispers of secret societies. Freemasons were rumoured to conduct initiations here, their robes soaked in mineral dew. Because if you're going to join a secret society, why not do it surrounded by 6 million witnesses who'll never tell? Some alleged that various mystic groups gathered in meditation beneath symbols carved in Latin, though as with all good secret societies, the evidence remains frustratingly secret. The proof, as always, is elusive. In April of 1897, an unauthorized concert was held in the ossuary, known as the Festival of the Dead. Saint-Saëns and Chopin echoed among bones, performed by musicians from the Paris Conservatory who had bribed the night watchman. The acoustics transformed the music into something otherworldly. Each note seemed to emerge from the bones themselves. But when the music faded, the labyrinth reminded the living of its rules. Several guests became lost. Some were not recovered until the next morning, found wandering in circles, claiming they had heard voices calling their names from chambers that, according to maps, did not exist. And then came war. During World War II, the catacombs became a battlefield of shadows. The French resistance used the tunnels to move unseen, weapons, messages, people, while the occupying Wehrmacht unknowingly constructed bunkers deep within the same system. One might say the Germans were literally undermined by the dead. There are stories of patrols who vanished, though whether claimed by Allied saboteurs or the labyrinthine tunnels themselves, history doesn't say. But even war did not dim the allure. In 2004, Parisian police inspecting a restricted section discovered something extraordinary: a fully functioning underground cinema. There was a large screen. professional-grade projectors, a bar stocked with whiskey and absinthe, tables and chairs carved from stone. The chamber was wired for electricity, connected to the city grid through cables that bypassed all municipal monitoring systems. The space could seat 60 people comfortably. Movie posters adorned the walls, classic films, art house cinema, and some titles that appeared to be completely unknown. Investigators found a guest book with hundreds of signatures dating back over a decade, including several celebrities and politicians whose identities were never revealed. 3 days later, when authorities returned, everything was gone. The chamber empty. Only a note remained. Ne cherchez pas. Do not try to find us. Whoever built it had access, resources, and purpose. They had lived among the dead, unseen, unbothered, perhaps even protected. Today their legacy continues in a quiet subculture. The cataphiles. These modern urban explorers know the tunnels better than the city above. They slip through drains and broken walls, navigating by memory and instinct. They paint murals, host underground dinners, hold secret rituals. The more dedicated among them have created detailed maps of areas that don't appear in any official survey, rooms that seem to shift location, corridors that lead to chambers that shouldn't exist according to geological surveys. Some map the ossuary. Others get lost on purpose, in search of forgotten chapels and phantom corridors. To the cataphile, the catacombs are not just a relic. They are a refuge, a second Paris, a city beneath the city, free of noise, of surveillance, of time, where stories linger longer than breath and shadows remember names. Some who enter the catacombs come back changed. Others never come back at all. In 1793, a man named Philibert Aspert, doorkeeper at Val-de-Grâce Hospital, entered the tunnels with a single lantern. He was reportedly seeking a hidden stash of chartreuse liqueur stored in a convent cellar, bottles hidden there by nuns fleeing the revolution's anti-clerical fury. But the passage twisted, his light dimmed, and Philibert disappeared. 11 years later, in 1804, workers found his body, deep underground, just feet from an exit he never found. His hospital keyring still hung from his belt. His leather boots had worn thin from endless walking. Forensic examination revealed he had survived for days, possibly weeks, drinking mineral water that seeped through the limestone. His remains were interred within the catacombs, with a plaque. In memory of Philibert Aspert, lost here in 1793, found 1804. He is the only person officially buried in the ossuary, a tomb within a tomb. But Philibert is not alone in legend. In the 1990s, rumours surfaced of a video camera discovered by cataphiles in an abandoned tunnel. The footage, they claimed, showed an explorer descending deeper and deeper. His breathing quickened. His light swung wildly. His footsteps became frantic. The timestamp showed he had been walking for 14 hours in what should have been a 2-hour circuit. Then, the tape ended. Static. The man was never found. The camera was a model discontinued in 1987. The film inside had been exposed to conditions that, according to experts, should have destroyed it completely. Yet it played perfectly for exactly 47 minutes before disintegrating into powder. Fact Folklore? No one knows. But even the myth has weight in a place built from bones. There is also the Chamber of the Singing Bones, a narrow hall where explorers report hearing distant voices, Latin prayers, whispers in medieval French. Audio equipment frequently malfunctions here, and when it works, recordings often contain things the explorers swear they never heard at the time. In 2019, one such team reported hours of silent footage. When played back, faint voices bled through, chanting. The words, distorted but unmistakably human, seemed to be reciting names, thousands upon thousands of names, as if the bones themselves were calling roll in death as they never could in life. Professional sound analysis revealed the voices were layered. Not one speaker, but dozens, possibly hundreds, all speaking in perfect unison at frequencies barely within human hearing range. Other corridors behave oddly. GPS maps glitch. Compasses spin wildly before pointing to passages that lead deeper underground than any official survey indicates. Some tunnels that exist on old maps now lead to solid walls. Others that don't appear on maps have been found, then lost again when explorers return with friends to prove their discovery. Modern ground-penetrating radar has detected chambers that appear to be filled with air, yet when cataphiles break through walls to reach them, they find only solid limestone. The radar signatures remain, as if the chambers exist in some parallel version of the tunnels. One particularly unsettling tale is told of a wall of skulls in the Hall of Crosses. A night guard, one of the few official employees who work alone in the ossuary, swears that one morning a single skull had moved, rotated slightly, cracked tooth now facing out. He was the only one with access. The security cameras showed nothing but an 8-second gap in the recording at precisely 3:33 a.m. But the skull had turned. The guard quit the next day. When investigators examined the skull, they found it had been cemented into position for over 200 years. Moving it would require tools and significant force. Yet dental records, checked against hospital admissions from the 18th century, revealed the skull belonged to a woman who had died screaming. Many cataphiles speak of a phantom figure, tall, dressed in 18th century garb, glimpsed just at the edge of light. Always ahead, never found. Some say he's Philibert. Others say he was here long before. His clothing matches descriptions from Revolutionary-era fashion plates, but his movements are wrong. Too fluid, too purposeful for someone lost and desperate. Security footage from official tours has captured shadow figures that don't correspond to any visitors. Thermal imaging reveals heat signatures in empty corridors. Motion detectors trigger in sealed chambers. The ossuary seems to breathe, not audibly, but spiritually. And sometimes, what it exhales isn't memory, it's presence. Even the artistry contributes to the unease. In flickering torchlight, the heart-shaped skull mosaics seem to beat. The bone wheels turn slowly, as if time itself is circular beneath the earth. Arrangements that once felt reverent begin to feel watchful. Visitors often leave the catacombs with the same thought. I was not alone down there, and I could feel I was being watched. The bones are still, but the story breathes. Above us, the city of light carries on. Street lamps shimmer on the Seine. Glasses clink in crowded cafes. Tourists line the railings of Montmartre to watch the moon rise over the rooftops. Paris lives and breathes. But beneath it, beneath you, rests the dead. 6 million of them. Their names have long since vanished, but their presence remains, stacked in quiet reverence. Bones once cloaked in flesh, now arranged in circles and symbols. Skulls that once smiled, cried, or sang, now stare blankly through time. Each one held a story. Merchants who sold bread on the Pont Neuf, seamstresses who worked by candlelight in Montmartre, children who played in gardens that are now boulevards, soldiers who marched under kings whose names history has forgotten, mothers who sang lullabies in languages that no longer exist. Each one passed through the fire of life, and now they reside in stillness, preserved in this underworld archive, where whispers last longer than voices. What makes the catacombs so haunting isn't simply the number of dead. It's that we live on top of them. Metro Line 4 rumbles directly over a chamber containing 30,000 skulls. The foundation of Notre Dame Cathedral rests on limestone quarried from these very tunnels. The Ritz Hotel's wine cellar shares a wall with a corridor lined with the bones of plague victims. Café de Flore, where existentialists once debated the meaning of life, sits 20 feet above a room where death has already provided all the answers. It is all closer than we want to believe. Modern Paris unknowingly honours its buried citizens. The metro system follows routes planned around catacomb chambers. Building codes restrict construction depths to avoid disturbing the ossuary. Urban planners work with maps that show two cities, the one that breathes and the one that remembers. And perhaps that's the lesson. The catacombs are not a horror. They are a truth. That beneath every city lies the forgotten, beneath every moment of joy, a memory, beneath every breath we take, the breath someone else once lost. Even in death we do not vanish. We echo. The limestone walls that once formed the bones of buildings now cradle the bones of builders. The quarrymen who carved these tunnels by candlelight now rest eternally in the shadows they created. The architects who designed the palaces above sleep in the foundations they made possible. There is a poetry in this, a democracy of death that the living rarely comprehend. And you, who have walked with us through this empire of silence, have heard those echoes. You have passed beneath the arch of bone. You have read the warnings carved in stone. You have stood beneath the gaze of the eternal audience. You are no longer merely a visitor. You are now a keeper, an initiate of the Ink and Lantern Society, that quiet fellowship who walks among the tombs. But your membership does not end here. Subscribe to continue your descent into forgotten truths. Let us take you through haunted asylums and sunken cities, through cursed manuscripts and vanished civilizations, through corridors history left behind but we have not. In the comments, tell us which shadowed path calls to you next. What whispers do you hear? What secrets lie buried in the cities beneath your own feet? And now, let your breath slow. Let the night gather softly around you. You may rest here, by our society's fire, where the shadows no longer threaten. They keep you warm. Let the dead rest. Let your mind drift. Let sleep claim you. And when the lantern begins to glow anew, we will explore another archive in the Hall of the Keepers. Until we descend again,